I'm going to be doing the video topic analysis for Champions Briefs for the January topic of public forum. Let's read the topic out and then we're going to delve more into it. So the topic for this month is resolve the United States federal government should prioritize reducing the federal debt over promoting economic growth. In this video, we're going to go over three fundamental things. First, a foundational understanding of key terms and ideas in the topic, a basic backgrounder. Second, we're going to go into strategy considerations. And then third, we're going to delve into arguments for either side of the topic that you could potentially use in your own cases and your own rounds. But before we do that, I just want to make a brief note that if you want more than this video has to provide, I highly recommend that you purchase the actual Champions Briefs. They have way more sample arguments in there, as well as greatly researched evidence and more written topic analyses by me, Jacob Erda, and Belen Milla. So with that said, let's get into this video, starting with a background on the topic. So there are two basic parts of this topic that are important to consider. Obviously, there's debt and there's economic growth. Let's start with economic growth. It's a little bit easier to understand. So economic growth is a change in GDP, the gross domestic product of our country. GDP is the total value of all the goods and services that are produced within the domestic economy. So what this means is that the GDP includes only the goods that are being produced in America. Goods that are produced by companies outside of the United States don't count for our GDP. Growth is a change in the amount of the value of these goods and services that are being produced, and this happens basically all the time. There's always a constant increase in the value. The question is whether or not we want this to, whether or not this is too low of an increase over time or too high of an increase over time. Generally, economists agree that we want economic growth to be between 2 and 4% increase every year. The reason why we want it to be in the sweet spot is because if we have too much economic growth, it leads to inflation, because when the value of goods and services is increasing over time, it means that the prices of those things are going up and up and up as well, right? What that means is that eventually it becomes unaffordable for people once the market inevitably declines in a recession, which means that people won't be able, the money that they're making won't be able to match the price increases of the products. And that's not so good. On the other hand, we want economic growth. We don't want it to be too low, because if economic growth is too low and we don't have goods and services being produced, then this means that people are out of jobs generally, because we need people in order to produce these goods and services. So we want the sweet spot of between 2 and 4%. Economic debt, on the other hand, or financial debt from the federal government, occurs when the government spends more money on programs and things that the government spends money on, subsidies, etc., that more than we take in taxes. So how do we finance this, right? So the reason we go into debt is because the government borrows this money basically by selling bonds and other types of securities. And what that means is that anyone can buy these bonds from the government. And when they do so, it's basically an IOU plus a little bit. So the United States government says, okay, I'll take your money now, and then in the future, I'll give you back your money plus a little bit more, generally 7 or more years. So the reasons why we would want there to be debt is because, well, it means that we can spend more, right? It means we don't have to collect as many taxes, which is good for economic growth, but at the same time, we get the benefits of being able to spend that money in a smart and conscionable way by the government, right? On the other hand, the harms of economic debt can include an increase in the interest rates, and this happens basically for two reasons. So there would be an increase in interest rates, first, because when people buy bonds, this means that they're giving up their own money to the government and then taking it out of the money that's in circulation. What this does is it reduces the money supply, i.e. the amount of money that's being circulated in the economy. This basic supply and demand here, this increases the value of money because there's less going around. So when there's a lower supply, there's a higher price, a higher value, because more people are competing for the same amount of resources. What this means is that if you want to take out a loan at a bank, you have to pay more because they know that it's more difficult to get a loan because there's less money going around to begin with. So what happens is that when there's a lower money supply, because people have spent their money on bonds and it's being held by the government, this means that there's more competition and thus a higher interest rate. We'll get into why high interest rates can be bad later on in the video when we go into arguments for each side, but that's generally what might happen. The second reason why there might be an increase in interest rates is because markets might distrust the United States' ability to pay back their bonds, right? So if we keep taking more and more money and we accumulate so much debt, it might appear to other people and other countries that the United States is less able to pay this money back because we just keep taking it. And that decrease in trust translates into an increase in the interest rates in order to compensate for the increase in the risk. So that means that the United States federal government would have to pay more back to people or promise more later on when they repay the bond in order to compensate for the increased chance they might never pay it back at all. This leads to a trickle-down effect on other interest rates throughout the market, which generally increases interest rates across the board. Okay, so now that we've got the basic fundamentals, because those are basically the only things that the basic pieces of information that you need to know in order to debate the topic. Once you know those things, you can basically go anywhere, right? Which brings us to the strategy. So given that you can basically go anywhere with this, where would you want to go? So I think that most teams on this topic are probably going to talk about the things that we just talked about. They're going to talk about reasons why economic growth is good, or they're going to be talking about reasons why debt is bad. The problem with that approach is that it fails to recognize that when the government prioritizes reducing the debt over increasing growth, this is an action. It's not just a hypothetical prioritization. To say that one thing is more important than another is to then act upon that value judgment. And so we have to look into and consider what specific policy actions will the government take when this prioritization occurs. So there's two basic things that can happen, right? There can be a change in taxes or there can be a change in spending. Because remember, the way that debt is accumulated is by spending more than you take in taxes. So to reduce the debt, you can either take in more taxes or you can spend less, right? And so if we're prioritizing reducing the debt over economic growth, we're going to do one of those two things. And the fundamental debate of this topic is going to be whether or not those actions are good or bad. So the next thing to consider is what specific ways will we do that? Because there's lots of different types of taxes, there's lots of different types of spending, and it's unclear exactly what the government would do if they made this new value judgment that reducing the debt matters more than growth. So a really, really important thing to focus on in this topic is being able to articulate in a clear and logical fashion why you think that the specific way that the government will act, that you have chosen, that you are arguing for, is going to be the specific way that the government will act once they make this value judgment of prioritizing the debt over economic growth. This is important because in order to make a concrete argument on the topic, in order to actually have a real impact that affects real people in the world, you need to point to specific instances where the government will act. It's hard to construct an argument with concrete impacts when the links themselves are very amorphous and focused more in the idea of economic growth and the idea of debt without linking into actual real-world policies. So that's really important to do, and it's really important to articulate clearly in the link section of your argument. And in fact, I think that with good evidence and with good explanation for the links of how you link into from prioritization to these specific actions and policy and policy making, with that alone, you will automatically be beating out most other teams who are unable to do that. And that will give you a comparative advantage, which is really crucial because of how important it is for making a good argument on this topic. The next thing you want to do is make sure that whatever policies you're talking about actually have a big impact, right? So the first step where you can win easily is on the idea of the link, whether or not you have a stronger link or a link at all from prioritization into policymaking. And then second of all, what the effect of that policy is and why it matters, and why that matters more than the types of policies that your opponents are saying are being cut and they are put or might get more funding, etc., or the taxes, right? Once you do that, it doesn't even matter if they win the link into their argument, because you can simply say, okay, it's fine that, I don't know, increasing taxes is a bad thing, but cutting X program, because it's so bad, is so good that it means that it outweighs the increase in taxes, right? And that's where you get into the nitty-gritty of the weighing and having a weighable impact, which is really important. And on this topic, that's actually pretty easy to do, because the opportunities are endless. What's open for grabs is the entirety of the United States budget and the entirety of our tax programs, right? So just choose one, find a link in, weigh it well, and you have yourself an argument. So let's get into a few suggestions for either side and how you can construct such a link story. Let's begin with the pro. So remember, in order to reduce, so the pro is advocating for reducing the debt. So remember, reducing the debt can come in one of two ways. First is by increasing taxes, or second by cutting spending, right? Increasing taxes without any spending guaranteed to come with it, and it wouldn't, because in order to reduce the debt, we would need to increase taxes, take in more money without spending, doesn't necessarily bring many benefits other than the fact that you're reducing the debt, which, remember, we talked about has the benefit of not increasing interest rates. So the reason why interest rates might be good to keep low is because it means that it's easier for businesses to take on loans and for people generally to take on loans in order to expand, let's say, expand their businesses, or let's say a student to go to school or something like that. It gives people more opportunities when they're able to afford more money in the form of loans from banks. So that's a good thing. You can easily impact out to that, no questions asked, because it's basically guaranteed and fiated by the topic. The second category of arguments, remember, is going to be cutting spending. So there are definitely so many programs that the government spends a lot of money on that are probably pretty bad, that it would be good if we cut the spending on. And you can argue that the programs are so bad that we need to reduce the debt so that we can cut these programs. It gives us an excuse to cut these programs, which is a really good thing. So, for example, there are lots of things that the military does which are probably pretty bad. Like, for example, giving military aid to authoritarian regimes, or, for example, maybe doing bombings in various countries where there's terrorism, which only increase conflict, right? Or, for example, there are many arguments to be made about why welfare is bad. We should probably be cutting that. There's arguments that say it creates a cycle of dependency whereby people are unable to take the steps to actually improve their lives or to get a better job because they're content with the money that the government is providing them, and they thus have no need in order to go out and make more money and get a better job. It reduces mobility. There are plenty of good arguments on both these fronts. Both of them are hugely weighable impacts, right? Linking into the military, links into the third world, people who have a lot less than people in America do, which means that any impact to them could be much more important. And then, if not, and you impact to welfare, well, then you're helping the poorest of the poor among Americans as well, and you have a great domestic impact there, and you're able to create a very good story on that line as well. Let's get into the other side. So, for the con, your options are similar, two-sided. Reducing taxes for this side, why lowering taxes would be good, or not raising taxes, why raising taxes would be bad. And then on the other hand, you have why not cutting spending is a good thing, right? So basically what you want to do let's start with the taxes. So taxes are good to lower because it means that people get more money. When you don't have to pay as much taxes, it means that you have a higher percentage of your income in order for you to spend yourself, either because your income taxes are lower or because you don't have to spend as much in taxes on your property or in sales taxes, etc., etc. When you have more money, it means that you can spend that money, right, on things that are good for you and things that are good for the rest of your community. So if you have more money, it means you can invest more in your education, in your children's education. It means you have more ability and mobility and flexibility, right? If you have more money saved up in the bank, it means that maybe you can take the risk to, quit your job and try to get a better paying job, which means that people are able to move around to jobs that better suit them and are more productive for the economy overall, thus increasing the pie for everyone. Furthermore, when you have money and you spend it in the economy, it means that businesses grow. Right? It means that now small businesses have your money, and then they can use that money to then go and hire more people. Moreover, when businesses get more money because they don't have to spend it on taxes, it means that they then again immediately directly have more money from lower taxes to hire more people, give people more jobs, or better yet, give raises, or possibly even provide more benefits like medical care and things like that to their employees. That alone is good as well. On the other hand, remember, we have spending. So there are lots of programs that the government has that are very good. It's very good that we spend money on them, and cutting that money would probably be a pretty bad thing, right? So for example, we have, just to name a few, Medicare and Medicaid comprise a very large percentage of our budget. If there were to be a cut, in order to finance a decrease in the debt, it probably would come here at least somewhere along the line. And Medicare and Medicaid are crucial for millions and millions of people across America. They depend on these programs in order to finance their medical expenses, and otherwise they would either be suffering horribly from diseases or probably just die because they're unable to seek the necessary treatment. There are plenty of other programs as well that are on the chopping block right now. Word is going around about the possibility of food stamps being cut. That would be bad because people depend on food stamps who are unable to buy their own food, so the government helps them out. And obviously you need food to survive. The list goes on and on. Farm subsidies. You could say that's good because it helps poor farmers in America. Or you can even go into the military and talk about why that's a good thing, why it's good to have presence across the world. And we shouldn't cut the military, which again is a very large percentage of our budget and probably would have to be cut. The opportunities are endless here for both sides of the topic. You can take any program and say it's good or say it's bad. You can take any tax program and say that's good or bad. And you can basically string together any argument you want as long as you have a solid link basis from the prioritization to the actual policy making and then very good weighing at the end. You can basically do anything on this topic. Given that it's so broad, again, I highly recommend that you buy the Champions Briefs itself. It has a lot of great suggestions in there, a lot of research already done for you. And I hope this was helpful. Happy holidays and happy debating.